Woke up and surrounded by strangers. It looked like E.T. Everybody's in their hazmat suits, consumed with this idea that they were going to kill me, but that they were going to kill me slowly. I was going to find a way to end it and not give them that satisfaction. Next thing I know, I'm just in the most beautiful place. There was a woman there. It hit me at this time who this woman was. If they get even a glimpse of what I saw, it's worth so much of this miserable life. I am a CPA, and in the year 2021, COVID was still kind of raging, and we were avoiding face-to-face meetings with clients. But about a week before that, I'd started not feeling so well, and I was working from home, and things got pretty rough, to the point that I went to the emergency room on a Friday night, and they checked me out, said everything was fine. They sent me home with some oxygen, and I probably could have done better to ask better questions, because the oxygen was kind of a low flow, but I didn't sleep real well without a CPAP, so I probably should have used a combination of the two. I was waking up really weak every morning after that Friday night, and it was getting pretty bad, getting bad enough that I was dwelling on my existence, at least maybe using that toward my advantage. I'm known to have a man cold, and my wife was getting a little bothered with me, and I kind of used it to my advantage, like, hey, this is serious. Something could happen to me. Maybe you don't want to roll your eyes at me just yet. But it was getting pretty serious. And on Sunday night, I actually started to feel better. Started to feel a little bit better. But we knew that I needed to go in and get a checkup or something. We had kind of planned on just having my mom come out and get the kids, and my wife was going to take me in. At the time, I had a set of 5-year-old twins and a set of 3-year-old twins. I took a shower and I was feeling really weak. But then I walked down the stair, and I just had enough energy to say, call an ambulance. I just was out of it, and I did. I passed out. I don't remember much beyond that. She did call an ambulance. My wife tells me things, and she showed up not too far after. My mom had showed up, had all these things attached to me, and they had my shirt off, and that's when I exclaimed my awful last words, and those last words were, I said, "Did you come to see my nipples?" It was a very distressing time. Part of the cruelty of COVID is that they kept us from families. They kept us from our families, and it was a protectionary measure for other people and for hospital workers. I don't resent them for that, but I will say this, that I woke up not remembering much and surrounded by strangers in, it looked like E.T., where everybody's in their hazmat suits, and it was just really a scary situation. And I was probably on some substances that made that a little more distressing, but had no indication that my family was around. In fact, I was probably paralyzed. I think that I thought that I could communicate with nurses, but I probably was not even able to communicate with them. They may not have known that I was aware. And it was the most distressing thing ever. I was only in this state of paralysis/coma for about a week. But as soon as I came out of that, it felt like I was gone for 3 months, because it was just utter distress. And I've never been consumed with this fear of death or fear of hell, but for a moment there, I felt like just abandoning the kids at the age that they were. I felt like I deserved something awful for that. I just felt like something awful was coming to me for that reason, for the reason of dying. I just knew I was gonna die, and consumed with this idea that they were gonna kill me, but that they were gonna kill me slowly. And I had it in my mind that I was going to find a way to end it and not give them that satisfaction. And that was my family's fear. My family's fear was, he's lost 2 kids, a genetic condition, and there were struggles. My poor little girl just, she was so tiny throughout her life, and as she grew up, she got a little bit longer, but never really gained weight. And you could just see every little blue vein in her arms, and her head was a little bit bigger, and you saw the blue veins. And I'll tell you what, I remember a time in Florida where I held my sweet little Whitney like a football, and I watched some people make fun of my baby, and I wanted to murder them. I just wanted to murder them. And the thing that kept me from hurting them is that I just had to hold on to Whitney. And to go from that, to go from just this worry about how she's feeling, this worry that life is painful, and it was painful for her. My son had the same condition. He was a little bit older. He was 8 years old when he passed, and had the big head, not necessarily the veins, but had a really good life. He had a good life, and it wasn't as filled with pain. Finally, I decided, okay, I'm gonna give it some effort. I'm going to try to breathe as long as I can. Now, keep in mind, the machine is breathing for me, but I'm trying to breathe, and there's this thing that's blocking me from breathing naturally. And I think they really want me to die. They've got this thing in my mouth. And finally, I give my last breath. Except I don't. I've expended my last ounce of energy. Like, even the ability to breathe, I had no more energy at all at this point. And I thought, okay, I'm gonna die now. I can't even breathe. I can't even put that effort out there. And I sat there in this dark hospital room, and imagined, just had this real dark idea of what my death was gonna be like, that they were gonna suck out my organs from the inside while I was still sitting there, and that they were in that process. And I only tell you this to tell you what a dark place I was in. It was just utterly dark. And I just knew I was going to die. I just knew it. And next thing I know, I'm just in the most beautiful place. It was the most beautiful place, the cleanest place. And as soon as I saw how clean it was, I just thought, this place, how can this place be real? How can a place be this clean? Now, as much as I wanted to die, as much as I fought to die, at this point, everything was so good that the idea, and I honestly, I feel like the idea that I had died, the idea that I was, that this was a death experience, was just taken from me. I couldn't consider that. And so I had a lot of questions. Like, how can a place be so clean? How can a place be so beautiful? But even beyond that, I just felt pure peace, just pure peace and pure love. But even more unique for me, there was no time stress. There was no worry to be somewhere or to finish this up. It just was utter calmness. And that's not my bag. I live life trying to get as much done as possible. And soon enough, there was a woman there, and I remember at one point she was kind of on the outside. She was kind of far away, and then at one point she was closer. But there was just this beautiful woman there, and I just had this urge to ask her who she was, and it was always immediately followed by just this idea of just that I would feel really ashamed if I had to ask her that question, because I knew who she was. And that was very much the feeling of this place. As soon as I arrived in this place, now I think this is unique to my situation in the sense that I wasn't even allowed to understand that I was here because I was dying or that I was in a coma. All that memory of being in the hospital was immediately gone. So I didn't fully understand where I was, but I did feel like I had this feeling of, oh wow, we're connected, we're back. Somebody connected this and we're back. And so there was a familiarity to this place and this familiarity to this woman. And I just stared at this woman, just found her so beautiful. And I was just basking in the moment, basking in being in her presence. And we just spent a lot of time there, and there was a lot of communication. And a lot of this communication was just purely mental, for lack of a better word. It just was downloaded. And so I came to understand that she has been caring for my family. And it was not as if it was just communicated to me. It's as if I was remembering this. I was remembering that she cared about my family and has spent a decade or so taking care of my family, and particularly my children. And that idea was so ingrained into me, and I just accepted it as truth. There was no other way to accept it. That she had, in fact, taken care of my family. So there were things like that were just kind of downloaded to me. And there were also moments where she spoke to me. I don't ever remember her opening her mouth to speak. I do remember her smiling. There was a moment where she even laughed at me. And I think that the laugh was because things were kept from me. They weren't kept from her, but they were kept from me. And it was this laugh, just like a dumb little puppy does something, falls over itself, and you laugh. It's such a sweet thing to see, and you give this innocent laugh, and that was the laugh. And I understood it as that kind of laugh. I wasn't insulted that this beautiful woman was laughing at me, but I understood that I was missing something. I just understood the intention of her laugh, and understood her words, and understood her importance in my life. And this woman being very much a guide in this situation. She was the one there to greet me. But because I didn't know where I was, there was not a deep conversation. I wasn't asking those deep questions. I just enjoyed her presence. I just enjoyed this place and the feeling that I felt, and it just was home. And it was home to the extent that I felt like I'll be back here. I'll be back here all the time. You know, it was so easy to get here. I would just make it back. So I also felt no stress in saying, okay, I gotta find out who she is right now in case I go back, because I didn't know where I was going back to. I didn't know how I got here. That those hospital memories were just simply taken from me for a moment. Until she finally had to tell me, "Hey, you're in the hospital. You're back in the hospital, and you're fighting for your life." And soon enough, found myself back in the hospital, having just had this beautiful experience. I'm back in the hospital, and I'm still unable to recognize this experience for what it is. I'm back in the hospital with this overwhelming fear of, okay, now I'm going to die. I've got this fear of death right back with me. And, I'm just terrified, still not getting anything from the nurses. And they're coming in, getting right in my face, and then they're leaving. And I can't tell you of anything more devastating than thinking that they are there just to look at you and ignore you and walk away. It was just absolutely devastating, and insulting. Now, I don't want to. I'm not trying to insult these nursing professionals. They were all so good to me, but what was the problem is that they didn't know that I was aware, and they had no understanding of the level of panic that I was in and the level of distress, until bam, I'm back there. I'm back in this beautiful place. Now, keep in mind, and for those who would be skeptical, I see nothing on my records that says I ever lost a heartbeat. And so for those who would be skeptical, I respect that. I never lost a heartbeat as far as my medical records go, but I was in a coma, and I found myself back in this just gorgeous place. And this time she had to reassure me. This time I didn't feel like I was there as long, and I didn't feel like my hospital life had been kept from me at this point. I understood now. Yes, I'm back in the hospital fighting for my life, but there was enough calmness there that I do remember walking around and just once again admiring this woman. And she had to tell me, and she actually told me, I remember the sound of her voice, and she said, you're going to be okay. It's going to be all right. So I remember her telling me this, and I remember it was as if this part was downloaded to me, but that she had done something on my behalf. I don't know what that was, but she had done something. I don't know if she had somehow impressed into the mind of a doctor or what she had done. It felt like she had very much done something on the other side to intercede in my behalf. Maybe I was otherwise not somebody worth taking care of it, and yet I felt like she had done something on one side or the other, and I knew that it was just that was downloaded to me, even though I didn't know the details. Um, and so there was a little more time spent there, but I had this full understanding that I was going to be okay. And I found myself back in the hospital, and I still had the same misunderstanding. The nurses still were not communicating with me, but I knew by the words that she spoke, I knew that everything was going to be okay. And so in my mind, every time I was in the hospital, I was trying to explain things. And when I was in the hospital this time, I tried to explain who this woman was. And I thought, she must be a neighbor. To love my kids this much and take care of my kids this much, she must be a neighbor. And keep in mind, I'm still under the impression that something was just connected. Something was connected to allow me to communicate with her in another place. And one more time, I'm not in another place, but I'm shown an image. I'm shown an image of my family, and I wish I could draw this again. I wish I could draw this image, but it's as if there were orbs representing things, and little purple and green orbs. But there was also just images of my family members. And this woman, now I want to backtrack a little bit. Throughout this experience, I knew there was a man there. I knew there was a man there, but I never saw this man. Never saw him. There was never a shadow or anything like that, but I knew that there was a man there. And so every time I thought I should ask her name, I also felt that about that man. I should, I know him. I had that same feeling that I know him. There were fewer details downloaded to me about this man, but that happened all along the way. And so finally, I'm shown this image, and it's my family. And I remember this image well enough to know that there's too many people there in this image, and that this neighbor of mine, I'll use air quotes to say that, this neighbor of mine has inserted herself into the picture, and that this man was there as well. Now it wasn't that crazy for her to say, when she showed me this image, she said, "We'll be together again, we will be whole." And because I understood the love, that didn't sound that crazy. I kind of laughed a little bit at the idea, like, oh, this family of mine is much bigger. But I felt that love. I felt that love, particularly for my children, that she had, and there was no reason to say, who's we? There was no reason to say that, because I just understood her love. I'm there at the hospital after this moment, and I just have this total clarity after I'm shown this image, and I know I'm gonna make it. I just know I'm gonna make it. And the nurses are talking to me now. They probably released me from the hospital a week and a half earlier than they would have, except that it was overrun by COVID. But even so, even though I wasn't even able to walk on my own, I wasn't able to walk upstairs for 3 weeks after coming back home. And even then, I had to watch my heart rate, because it was just, my body was just healing. It was really a grueling process for me. But in the hospital, I just wasn't able to do anything. I wasn't able to turn onto my side or do anything on my own. And yet, as I woke up, and I just knew everything was going to be okay. And once I was able to communicate with the nurses, they just kept trying to tell me, like, hey, you need to slow down. Like, you think you're going to get out of here tomorrow? No way. And I found that kind of devastating, because I just knew everything was going to be okay. And I really do think after a couple of days of communicating, there was a good prognosis. there really was a good prognosis, and they were starting to finally say positive things to my wife, which they had absolutely avoided saying until the final nurse said, it was the hospitalist, and that doctor had said, she wrote on a board that we had essentially a 5% chance of making it through, and just use that to say, you really need to make some life changes. You weren't supposed to pull through. And a lot of the nurses at the end, they said things like, "Oh, we were so worried about those little kids of yours." And I thought, well, what about me? And one of them, really bluntly said, "We thought we knew what was going to happen to you." And those next weeks just thinking, what do I need to do better? What do I need to do to be prepared for death? And also, what do I need to do to avoid death? Part of that was getting healthier, but I just had this nagging feeling of that there was something to learn here. And I kept thinking, maybe I need to be closer to God and read my scriptures. And I felt like those were noble things, and that those were right things. That I needed to find ways to be more spiritual and just an overall better person. I never felt like that wasn't it, but I did feel like there was just something saying, "No, dummy, there was something bigger." And so there I was, and I just was able to walk up the stairs. And this was probably the first night that I could get out of bed on my own. I had a walker for several weeks, and I got out of bed. I still was connected to oxygen, but I got out of bed on my own and was able to kind of shuffle into the master bathroom. This is probably 3 a.m, and I just sat there and really thought, okay, what did I need to learn? Thinking that this learning was going to be something related to being a better person. And just then I saw this woman again, experience this second experience of mine all over again. Heard her voice and saw her laugh, and it just a totally beautiful experience. And I felt all those same feelings, and it hit me at this time who this woman was, and it hit me because as I saw this woman, I was looking at myself. I was looking at somebody who is a perfect morph of my mother and my wife. And I just knew that this was family, and I knew that this was my daughter who had been there to guide me and to calm me down. And just to kind of go back to my family members, their doubts, and let me say one more thing. Well, I'll get to that, but my family members' doubts were a lot centered on the idea that there has been something missing from my life. A lot of these problems that I had, being overweight, resulted at the death of my daughter and at the death of my son. There's been a lot missing in my life, and I've not always reacted the best to that. And I think a lot of their doubts of me fighting and being a fighter were centered around that there was something better. So, but my wife also, she began praying very intently. And one night she specifically prayed that I would have the comfort of my now deceased children. The daughter who was born in 2005, and she passed in 2007. And I had a son who was born in 2008 and passed in 2016. So she prayed for that, and not only did she pray for that, she felt this immediate comfort that prayer would be granted. And my family felt the opposite. Like, I sure hope that my dying brother doesn't catch a glimpse of them. Now, in my mind, that possibility was just totally taken from me. So you can see that both sets of prayers were answered. That my wife wanted me to be comforted by then, but maybe more of the fears of my family that I may keep walking, keep going in that direction, should I be presented with the idea of who these people are. And so at that moment, just sitting there in the bathroom attached to our bedroom, I was just overcome with the understanding of who this woman was. And it all immediately made sense. Right? I had been admiring this woman. I had been watching her. And now if this had just been some woman, all of that would have felt wrong or weird. But to be a father, seeing your daughter after so many years, and just to see her grown up in her beauty, all of a sudden this made sense. That I adored this woman, and all those feelings were as they should have been, even if at the moment I didn't realize what that love was, exactly who this woman was. But that was all there, and that all began to make perfect sense to me. Something that's a little special to me is I've always, I'm kind of a cynic. I've always been religious, and I've always had a belief in the afterlife. Of course, when I was there, immediately I didn't know what it was. But I've had a belief in the afterlife. But I also had this personal belief, mixed up belief, that once somebody arrives there on the other side, that they have better things to do. And so when sweet and caring people say something like, oh, she's still there, or somebody's still there and still cares about you and is still taking care of you, I really kind of rolled my eyes at that idea. And yet, the amount of work, I just knew that this immense amount of work had gone into my Whitney taking care of her siblings. So as I was back in the hospital, I just questioned, why would this woman put so much effort into my kids? Why would a neighbor do that? As soon as I understood who she was, it made perfect sense. I've read 1,000 near-death experiences, and the ones that are the sweetest to me are the ones where somebody talks about hearing the voice of a child. You hear experiences where somebody had a miscarriage, and they have this near-death experience, and they hear that child speak. And I understand that feeling completely. And so you just know that there's nothing fake. That person is not faking that, because who else could understand how special that voice is? And they're often saying the same things, like, I heard this voice, I heard her voice or his voice, and yet mouth never moved. But just enamored with the idea that those who have passed, they do care about us, and I don't know specifically the things that they do, but I know there's an involvement. I don't expect I'll ever get back there while living, but but it felt so close and so easy to get to. I'm still consumed with that idea, but just an overwhelming feeling of love, just indescribable. And I've said this earlier, but my wife has taken such good care of me. She gives me more credit than I deserve, and I love her and feel that love constantly from her, but nothing compared to the love that I felt there. And that's a hard thing to say to my wife, but I think she understands that. She's much less of a cynic than I am. It was that sweet of an event, and I've really had some closure. I didn't know how much I had been missing my daughter. I didn't know how much I'd been missing my son, but I just have had a real sense of closure, just to catch a glimpse of the other side, and just to know that I would die to get there. And I don't recommend it. That's a terrible idea to just purposely die to get there. All I can think of is to share that, because it's easy to look at this world. It's easy to look to some place in the world where children are not respected, or to where people are not respected. And it's so easy to say, how could that person live a life where they starve and it's just a cold life, and then they die. And I don't want to sound flippant about any of this, but I do hope that people will consider that even that person will come away and just be able to discard that crisis that we call life. That's how overwhelmingly beautiful it is from a view and from a feeling standpoint. And if there's one thing that I'd like to repay, it's just that, the feeling. And some would call me callous for even saying that. How would I know how somebody in this part of the world lived? I don't, and it's scary to think about. And yet, if they get even a glimpse of what I saw, it's worth so much. It's worth so much of this miserable life. It gives me comfort to think that that's how it will be for others. That if life is a crisis and they arrive on the other side, they're just met with beauty to the extent that they forget that crisis.